Ready to go to sleep? I'm going to put you to sleep with this southern accent. So all the rednecks you see from American TV, that's me. So before I get started on sports science, I just kind of want to give you a background of where I come from. Because I believe that most people feel a little bit intimidated by sports science. And for good reason. Sometimes we as scientists like to sit in an ivory tower and look down at the practice field and shake our heads. And that doesn't need to be the case. And so I am not what I would call first and foremost a sports scientist. Even though the USOC likes to call me that. I actually started off my career as a Division I track and field coach and strength coach. So I come from athletics, sprints, hurdles, jumps, and also strength conditioning. So I went through coaching of athletics, and I always knew that I needed more information. So I put my coaching career on hold, went back and got my doctorate, because I felt like I needed to know more. And so what that allowed me to do was to understand more advanced sports science and apply it to the field. So what we're going to do today is talk about training theory and how science can really influence the decisions you make. Because in 2012, it is impossible for you to be a coach, successful coach, without adopting some of these strategies. Because the way technology is going, what we know about genetics, and the way that we know cells turn over based on the exposure to exercise, we can't just do things based on assumption, myth, and pure speculation. So now coaches have to be scientists. But remember, you're a scientist not in a lab, but on the practice field. So I just have the pleasure of having both. I've got a lab and I have a practice field. My practice field just happens to be a lot colder than I'm accustomed to in athletics. Anything below 50 degrees, I'm not doing too well. Somehow I ended up in late class. All right, so training theory. Some of this stuff is going to be very familiar. The idea behind training theory is to develop a well-rounded athlete. So the idea is not only to improve the physiological standard of the athlete, but also the psychological and the ability to play that sport, whatever he or she may be involved in, tactical, technical, etc. In order to do that, our idea is to exploit the sciences. I will drive that message home for the next 2 days. As a coach, you should have a basic understanding of physics, how it relates to your sport, physiology. Physiology also encompasses chemistry and simple biology, and also psychology. Now, when we develop an athlete for competition, we have to move through stages. And I'll kind of reinforce this as we move through the presentation. The first thing we always want to do is focus on multilateral development. That means make sure the foundations are there. Make sure the pillars are strong. And so that means that we improve strength, stamina, coordination, mobility, etc. So we're not myopic in our view. We are simply structuring a holistic approach around our athlete. As we move forward through the training year, we want to be more specific, obviously. We want to curtail our training to the sporting demands. If we're developing alactic sprinters for the 60-meter dash, probably not a good idea to be doing 3-mile runs. Okay, so it has to be specific to the sport. This is something as a joke. You know, in America we have this story of Goldilocks, and I always find it applicable to sport. So Goldilocks, you know, she liked oatmeal. So did some bears that lived out in the woods. Long story short, how this relates to training is you should always understand that to get an athlete to the next level doesn't always mean that you just put more volume on them. Just throwing something on your athlete doesn't automatically improve performance standards. So everything has to be moderated and everything has to be well thought out. And that's the idea behind training theory and periodization. So it can't be too hot It can't be too cold. The training volume, the intensities have to be just right. So always think of that child tail when you're writing up your training programs. Now, when we talk about improving performance and making good decisions in improving and increasing training loads and intensities, we have to make sure we do so with purpose. And there are different things that we can improve, and it depends on the sport. I would say in the weight room, it's very easy to improve work capacity, strength, endurance, overall force development through volume load. So I'll get to that in a minute. The volume load can be influenced by the number of repetitions that you perform. So you can do another set of a given exercise. You can increase the weight on the bar. If you're a distance coach, things that you can do is increase the mileage, the kilometers, the minutes that your athletes run. Same thing for short speed. You can do meters. Jumping sports, you can measure the jumps. So even basketball, one thing that I know in college basketball that they're doing now is motion analysis, that they're actually measuring how many times an athlete jumps off the ground. That correlates to high and low days. So, okay, they attempted 22 rebounds, 14 jump shots. So how many jumps was that compared to how many they have in a typical game? So there's ways you can influence the volume to actually improve preparedness throughout the year. Intensity, again, there's easy ways to do that, actually changing the weight on the bar, the speed of movement in either a sprint, it doesn't matter, wherever you're working on, the height of a jump. But one thing that I think people fail to neglect or they forget to talk about is perceived exertion. You always have to make sure that you're talking to your athletes and make sure that one way that you can improve the intensity of a session is just by saying, how did that feel? It was hard. Okay, we're going to continue down that path. If it gets harder, maybe you back off. Maybe it's too easy. Maybe you need to step it up. So again, listening to your athlete, communicating, because perceived effort is big. Sometimes we can say, I want you to lift this weight at 92%. So you take your best lift is 100 kilos. 90% of that is 90 kilos. Well, let's say they slept sporadically through the night, they didn't have a good meal, they fought with their significant other. Now that 90 kilos is actually heavier than you want it to be. So perceived effort comes in here. So maybe you want the athlete to lift at 90% of what their 100% is that moment. So again, things to think about. Other ways to increase the training load is obviously the number of competitions in a training year. So if you're going with junior athletes, maturing them through the system, one way to do that is obviously to increase more competitions. Early on, remember you're training to train. So as you train to train, maybe you have 1 or 2 competitions, friendlies. The next thing you have is 3 or 4. So as they get older, and then once they mature and they're an elite athlete, maybe you start implementing more competitions against elite counter opponents. You can have different equipment. So in diving, it's different springboards for one. Now, I keep going back to this phenomenon of volume loading. One thing that is easy for a coach, instead of thinking about time under tension or other ways of measuring exertion or how intensity impacts an athlete, one thing a coach can do that we know correlates 100% to an athlete's ability to recover is volume load. So volume load is how much you do multiplied by the intensity at which you perform that task. So volume load, if you can walk out of here to remember one thing, manipulating volume load is going to be one of the key strategies that a coach can do in periodization. Because we know 100% that too much volume load causes overtraining syndrome. So there's a huge difference between overreaching and overtraining. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Volume load is that key thing, the key strategy that you can do. When you talk about overreaching, what we're talking about is delaying a taper. We're actually wanting to also revisit some fitness components that we instilled in the general prep phase. So there's a lot of things that you can do with overreaching. And this is an example. So one thing later on tonight that I'm going to talk about is block periodization. So in block periodization, you will do things such as in the weight room, 4 weeks of a strength endurance task, 3 sets of 10 reps. Then I will drop the volume load to 3 sets of 5. But one would argue that that's linear periodization. Now, I can argue that all day long that it's not. But one way to make this more concurrent, if you will, over the year-long process is to provide an overreaching week in that training program. So you can see, just if we do the math on volume alone, we go from 30 reps a week to 15. Now I'm back to 25. So I'm very close to the reps I performed in that first block. But my volume load is actually higher in this week compared to the volume load the body was exposed to here. Can you tell me why? So this is in the weight room. Let's just think we're squatting. So we're doing back squats. Why would the volume load be higher in this week compared to the volume load the athlete felt in those weeks of 3 sets of 10?
Spread over a longer period?
Okay, so you can spread over a longer period. Think what's happening when I do 3 sets of 10. Can I, anybody in weightlifting in here? Okay, with weightlifting, when I'm doing 10 reps of anything, can I go to my maximum effort? As far as my 1 rep max, my 3 rep max, my 5 rep max. Am I going to be able to do 30 reps near my 1 rep? Probably not. Anybody, any distance coaches? Okay, can you run your mile personal best for a whole marathon? No. Okay, so we have to back off the intensity to do something of multiple repetitions, right? But if I drop my overall volume from 30 repetitions to 15, I can go a lot heavier. I have more intensity. But now I'm on 5s. So now, maybe this was 3 sets of 10, and maybe I squatted 80 kilos. And then maybe in 3 sets of 5, I built up to 90, 95 kilos. Now in 5 sets of 5 times 85 to 90 kilos. So when you do the math, the volume load's actually higher here. So that's overreaching.
Can you see that you're going to change the ability, maybe you move the weight to a strength and endurance, and you go back to a strength endurance in 5x5. So okay, so you bring by 5x5 by let's say 40, 60, 70%. Maybe by 10 down there it will be definitely 10 going to be at almost a strength endurance too. You can be up there by 60 by 70% with that amount. So up there with the 5 reps, basically up there with the 5 reps it might be, let's say 80–90%. But with the amount of in the set, definitely you have an overlapping effect on the athletic. They train up. You can expect that at that time in the training, his endurance and his strength, everything will be much higher in that amount of training. So it definitely will be overlapping training. But if you put it to an individual event, this is something basically that you do.
Yes.
At that period of time. So if you say the bottom down there is a general preparation, after how much weeks, the block will present how much weeks?
So that would be 1 block is 4 weeks.
4 weeks.
And that's 4 weeks.
So you basically let's say a competition, a pre-competition period then, depending on it.
Well, depends, because we may be getting ahead of ourselves,
Yeah.
but very rarely are you going to have such high volumes that far away from a competition.
Yeah.
Right, so if we're talking about power speed events, you're never going to have that high volume, but just because of the physiological changes that occur to the muscle. So more, I would say that that 3 sets of 10 and that 5 by 5, you're still maybe 4 months away from competition. But the key point here is that, and again, this is science. There's a reason we're winning the medal count. You know, is because we know that we can put this 5 by 5 up and then have a marked decrease towards a taper. So anybody familiar with the work of Mojica? That would be a name I would write down. If you are working towards international competition or in the middle of it, and you want to know about tapering strategies, Mojica, M-U-J-I-K-A, I would be reading up on that, and there's lengthy discussions on periodization and specifically into a taper.
M-O-J-I-C-A.
M-U-J-I-K-A.
Can I ask?
Yes.
5 times 5 is the peak performance, then we go taper, yeah?
Well, the 5 by 5, that's just
The peak for the micro
for
size.
that block.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a block,
Yes.
this is a block,
And this is.
and that's a block. So you only overreach for 1 week. And it revisits the conditions that you put on the body here, so it maintains that strength endurance. And it allows you not only to build strength endurance, but also work towards maximal strength endurance.
So let's say strength endurance, I start with 40% of the intensity, 3 times 10. Then 3 times 5, I go to 60%. 5 times 5, like 70% intensity.
It's not going to continue to go up. Like you would, because you're doing more volume, you have to accommodate. Remember, it's that Goldilocks. Like it has to be, it can't be too hot. Like you just can't, you can't increase intensity and volume at the same time. So if I go up 5 by 5, I may go down from like week. I feel like we're getting into stuff that's going to come up like in an hour. But you have to accommodate for that slight increase. And then I would actually super compensate in the week following that 5 by 5. I would actually go back up in intensity pretty high. So this is all. This is just a general example of overreaching. That's all this is. I promise you guys. Like, don't overthink this just yet. So we are not even talking about an annual plan.
Yeah.
We're just talking about what overreaching is. Overreaching is just gradually increasing volume or intensity in the short term.
Yeah. And do you do this after a test of a max test, right? Like to start?
You can. I argue that you should overreach every 4 to 6 weeks. Going into competition, we actually overreach in competition. Any questions?
One, I want to ask you, is this only for tournament competition, or is for championship who play every Saturday 1 match? Is there some difference?
So before we get into specifics, just think right now, all athletes from equestrian to golf, to bowling, to baseball, to athletics should overreach. If not, your fitness decays. So that's all we're saying right now is you want to, as a coach, not be fearful of improving fitness by actually taking your athletes to a threshold of fatigue. You're welcome.
Does the overreaching means compensation?
Yeah, slightly, yeah.
Alright, then is it that the first day was like where you have 5 by 10 at the bottom of the stable stage, and then about 3 by 5 to that 1 will be compensation, the 5 by 5 for compensation will be compensation.
Yeah, for the most part. Yes. So, yes. Just in case, I need to give a different example in the weight training. So, like, let's say distance running. This would be, 50 miles a week, 55, 60, 55 to 57 miles a week, because the last week should always be a recovery week. And then I go 65, and arbitrary numbers, this is not how I train distance athletes. 65, 70, and then, this would be like 80, back to 70, 75, like just, I'm trying to give you a different example. But I promise you in an hour, this will make sense. Just you're overcomplicating it. Now, when I go into volume load, remember I just kind of said this. The idea is that most periodization strategies ask you to know that you're working with humans. And we know humans need recovery, unless you're doing things that we don't really recognize. So, if you're being fair, typically the body needs a week recovery, meaning not laying out at the beach, sleeping late. This just means a reduction in volume load every 4 weeks. So you build up and you bring it down. You build up, you bring it down. So you can actually improve performance better if you let your athletes recover. Your athletes are not going to get in worse shape because you give them a day off or a down week. Direct opposite. They're going to have a better career, better mindset psychologically. Velocity of movement improves after recovery weeks. The list goes on.
Depend from sport to sport?
It will depend on sport to sport. It depends on athlete. I mean, you're looking at team sports, let's say basketball, baseball. You can't just take a week off from competition. And so it depends on the competition schedule, but your training, what that coach does in the practice sessions, or maybe when they're coming up with their practice schedule, if you always can think about how to provide the athletes some recovery. Maybe a third through the season, you actually schedule in some weak opponents to where you can give your point guard some less minutes on the court. So there's things that you can do. And especially young athletes, on the other hand, may not can load for 3 weeks. Maybe they need to go 2 up, 1 down. And so there's elite athletes that we work with at the training center that, because of injuries, they have to go 1 and 1. And so that makes it very complicated. But that's where the coach has to come in, and that's the art of all this. Like I always say, we're scientists, and we paint. So we have this palette, and we paint. That's our art, but all the colors are the sciences. And so that's what we're doing, is we just use our art, which is based on this communication and this inference of what that athlete's telling us on what decisions to make. But yeah, it's always athlete specific. But when we call just strictly with periodization for like a mature athlete, it's typically 3 to 1, unless we're doing some other activities, maybe like some really concentrated loading, like eccentric strength training. You may need more than 1 week, and we can talk about that later on. Now, another term outside of volume load that I would recommend that you remember is long-term lag of training effect. Remember that we live in a society right now where everything happens in an instant. If I want to know the weather, all I have to do is hit a button on my phone and it tells me the weather. If I want to know who won a game, if I want to watch that game, I literally can get on the phone and download that video. That is not how the human body responds. But our athletes think that that's how their body can respond. You know, Jeff and I talked about it this morning. We have a huge issue in this country, and earmuffs, maybe within different organizations, with sports medicine, because they're treating athletes based on what they want, and they want to feel that instant gratification. My back needs this, my glute's not firing, whatever they read on the internet. And then they go get treatment and they're out the door. Didn't fix the problem, but the athlete thinks it did. And so we have to make sure that we preach to our athletes long-term lag of training effect. Meaning, what you do today, you may not see for 6 to 8 weeks. Depending upon how intense this session was, this block, this week, this month, you're not going to see the dividends of your investment until later on. It's just like banking. It's just like making money. You can't go to the bank, put in $1, expect to go into the bank the next day and take out $10. No, not here. So you have to educate your athletes on what you're doing. Now, getting into periodization. Just looking around, I see that a lot of you have Lampa's book on periodization. I think that's the one co-authored by Pat, which is a good book. Definitely something to get you started. When it comes to periodization, it's been around forever. Philostratus was a Greek philosopher, and he talked about coaches before Christ actually trained athletes and were thought to be wizards, that we could actually look into the body, determine what needed to be done, and do things to that person to make them a better athlete. Pretty cool. We have gone a long time arguing about periodization strategies, and I'm in the middle of those dogfights. And I will be the first to tell you, well, not really the first, we all will admit this, most periodization strategies work. It really you've got to find out what works for your athletes and what you're comfortable with. Okay? So your own research will guide you. I obviously have an opinion. I may share it. Depends on how good of a mood I'm in. But this definition right here is by the co-author of your book. It's actually an updated version of the definition of periodization. This is the one that the NSCA is using as of last year. And so what they are saying is the NSCA, National Strength and Conditioning Association, they're trying to shy away from periodization for performance. I'm all about it. And so we'll get to it in just a minute. Most definitions are the same. Logical, phasing, integrated, sequential. So you're talking about making informed decisions and cycling training intensities, volumes, practices to allow for recovery. So we see a lot of the themes here. Dr. Mike Stone, again, my mentor, Bill Kramer. So some American sports scientists and their definitions of periodization up until this point. But I always have to put my name in. And I'm not doing this because I need credit. I'm doing this because we are in a time now where we can't continue to do what we have been doing. This year, so this is still in submission, in 2012, I'm arguing that periodization can still follow those same rules, but those decisions have to be guided by science. So we can take all these definitions, add them together. We're still looking at utilizing and harmonizing the relationship between training-induced fatigue and accommodation, but those choices you make in training have to be based on an advanced knowledge regarding physiological, biochemical, and psychological principles. It's just the way it is. One thing I'll go over tomorrow is interference phenomenon. There's proof in the pudding that the last thing that you do in the day will tell your cells how to recover and how to regrow. Meaning, if I want to be a sprint power athlete and I go out and run a mile to cool down, probably a bad idea. Probably a bad idea. Because your body is basing protein transcription on sometimes the last thing you do a day. Just a thought. Now, through periodization, what we're trying to do is to come up with something like this. So this is an annual plan. So an annual plan is 1 year of training where you track and quantify the practice sessions and the competitions, the recovery strategies, the nutrition, everything of the athlete. You can put it in Excel, however you want to do it. There's a website now that's free, and I think everybody has access to it, and it's called Sportably. Sport, S-P-O-R-T, A-B-L-Y. Sportably is a website created by Dr. Stone and Bill Sands, formerly of the USOC, and one of their grad students, Jeremy Gentiles. .com, yes, .com. Sportably.com. You can register your team. Each athlete, you can put the practice sessions in it. The athlete can put in what they eat. They can put in every morning their urine color, their heart rate, how they feel. All of it goes into a database that you look at online, and it shows you the volume load. It does all this work for you. The stuff that I used to have to do on a piece of paper, on graph paper, 10 years ago, and then we finally got used to Excel, and now it's like this website with pretty pictures and the lines and 3D animations. It's free. There's a lot of websites like Visual Coach out of Australia that charges you pretty much an arm and a leg. This one's free. So I highly recommend it. But it allows you to build an annual plan, and it makes things so much easier for you. It saves everything. Now, at the end of that annual plan, the goal is to induce a taper. And that taper is what we would call readiness. And readiness is the highest level of technical skills, velocity, strength, etc., that are capable for medaling or winning the competition. There's different ways to taper. Maybe we can talk about that tomorrow. But I would also suggest homework, looking into the Mohica reviews. Now, how do we get to that annual plan and how do we get to that taper? Training theory. Before we get started, just remember, you're training the athlete for competition. It starts in general prep phase. You cannot skip and fast forward past general development. Elite athletes, mature athletes don't need to spend very long in that, but they still need to spend some time in general development. Maybe a block, where a young athlete may 3 to 4 blocks of that. So it all depends on the athlete. General development. That would mean things that don't mimic the sport. So that would mean that for weightlifting, for instance, instead of being on the platform all the time, maybe they're doing lunges, maybe they're doing chest flies, maybe they're doing Romanian deadlifts, maybe they're doing, for active recovery, maybe they're playing racquetball. So things that just are not specific to that sport. At the end of the day, remember, we're trying to peak at the right time. That's the goal. How do we do that? Well, if you go back to the various definitions of periodization, we talked about strategically cycling training principles and training practices. Because you cannot just continue to go up. You cannot just continue to load intensity and volume on top of an athlete without them breaking down. So you have to put it on them, pull it back. Put a little bit more on them, pull back even more. Put a lot on them, and then pull off and then let them compete.
So, more load, more rest.
Yes.
So he will gain.
So for an example, when we talk about recovery, anytime that you train, we have this fitness fatigue. So I'm fit, and as soon as I go through practice, I am fatigued. And all that fatigue does is just cloud the nervous system. And tomorrow we'll talk about what occurs specifically. But anytime that I exercise, I actually do gain positive adaptations in my body. But that fatigue in the nervous system doesn't let me feel it. So I have to actually recover for me to feel the velocity that now I've gained through practice, or the gains in aerobic power, whatever the case may be, technical skills.
Even mentally, it's effective.
Mentally, yes. You're exactly right. So it's recovery is fundamental. And that's all we're saying, is that you're cycling training to allow for recovery and to make sure that you can move progressively forward from one thing to the next. For instance, if you want to be fast, you have to be strong. People try to put the cart before the horse, and they try to work on speed and jumping too early. They're going to burn out. More important, they're going to get fast, but they're going to stay at that plateau, where the athletes who actually build their speed on top of true strength are going to be faster, and they're going to dominate. So again, it's cycling training exposures.
What about the swimming?
Swimming?
Yes.
I don't want to make assumptions, but coming from athletics, I feel like there are a lot of similarities between swimming and different, as far as the 100 all the way up to the to the 10K just in parallel with the different events in swimming, physiologically. Just the only difference is the ground contact. So you don't have all the forces incurred on the body, but being someone who doesn't work with swimming, I can't tell you what the fatigue level is of an athlete in the pool. You know, because I would say, you know, let's say a sprinter in track and field.
They're not touching the ground. So all the seals are like the sprinters that have more or less adaptation and short distance, not like the other for long distance swimmers, like you can say it's a middle distance, like 100 by half. More or less their approach is really different, totally different. That maybe at the beginning for angels or say the all the things to come. At the beginning they are the same, but after that they are doing it different way. So this like I think from the food side, this more or less I think it's really the same athletes, but time different. That's all.
The one thing I will say is that a good training program, and this sounds crazy, if you take a good training program and you take the name of the sport off of it, a coach shouldn't be able to look at it and say, that's purely this, that's purely that. And I'm talking about the overall length of plan of how you move through a season and develop. You know, because the body needs a certain amount of things to develop. And I would say that's a problem in America, is that a lot of coaches want to make everything sport specific. And so you'll see baseball players, you know, with dumbbells, or they're trying to stand on one leg in a cable machine to come through. And it's like that. If I can identify what you're doing just on a piece of paper, it's probably a bad thing. You know, so I would say there are a lot of similarities. Just like I said, it's how the coach utilizes this for their specific situation.
How do you deal with sports with like that plays maybe 10 months in a year and weekly? How do you deal with that preparation part, the business part?
What sport?
Let's say basketball.
Okay.
Play 10 months, and country play 10 months only, this guy falls only, and it's a game of 2 weeks, 3 weeks. How do you prepare that?
That's hard. I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? I mean, that's kind of what led to this, in this country, that's what led to the debate between traditional periodization and undulating. We have team sports who compete all the time and going through phases of strength endurance to strength to a taper doesn't really work for team sports. Now, there are ways to make it work, but that was kind of the first answer, was let's do undulate, where one day of the week you do strength endurance, the next day you do power, and the next day you do this. And that way the athlete kind of just maintains their abilities year-round. But the problem with that is the athlete never gets a chance to truly develop, to tie up loose ends, and actually focus on the long term. You know, my easy answer, which is probably not realistic, is to try to figure out a way to give those key athletes a break from that competition in a 10-month period. Like, is there a way to where you can limit the people you count on? Can you limit their minutes early on to let them have a true development phase? Just to be able to step back from the game, work on technique. It's actually, you know, that sacrifice you make on the short term. Let's say in a quad. So let's say that we just finished London, and now we're looking into Rio. So let's say that you take your national team, you take some of the people that you know are going to be in Rio, but you need to work on some things. So you take them, limit their minutes, limit their games, work on that, allow them to recover. Then you bring in some juniors to get them some minutes playing. Now your win-loss is going to take a hit, right? But you're actually going to be in better shape 2 years into the quad because the key players have now been restored, and then they're also stronger, they're faster, etc., because you took a chance to let them develop. That's what I would recommend, but again, that's in my little fuzzy world of theory. It boils down to, what's the most important? Is it 10 months of competition? Is there a competition in 2 years? Is it, like how deep is your program? Like, do you have the ability to even pull people in and let other people invest? But it's that's hard. I mean, to give you an example, what I see happening here is the way American kids in high school are taught and told how they're going to get a college scholarship. So our developmental program in the United States is, you may have heard, high school to college to professional. So we really rely on college sports to develop our elite athletes. Nowadays, like when I was growing up, so I'm 37, I went to college to play baseball. It was high school ball, summer ball, and then after summer was over, you got to go play football. And then you got to play basketball after football was over, and then baseball started. So I got to put down the baseball bat and go play another sport. Now, I see kids who play baseball go from summer ball, fall ball, school ball, showcases, camps, more camps, spring. It's just like it's constantly playing baseball. And then they're injured all the time. And we want to know why kids are having Tommy John surgery. Why are kids having lower back problems? Why are we having psoas problems? Why are we having this? It's like, because the kid never gets to put the bat down. So it's like you...
Over. It's like over.
Yeah.
Too much.
It is. It's like too much cyclical. It's just the same thing over and over again. Where if you look at the research from studies done on elite hockey players and even some American football players, they actually are better at their sport and can recognize, let's say, a linebacker in American football. A linebacker in American football who has played basketball, let's say they're a small forward, a power forward in basketball, let's say they played baseball, they actually can read offenses just as good as someone who played football alone from the time they were a youth. Because those other sports fed in to their motor patterns, their ability to recognize patterns and be able to change on the fly. Like, that's the things that we forget. We think that our athletes have to do this sport every day, and it's just unnecessary. But it's a money-making scheme here in this country. It's like, we got to get your kids to a showcase if they want that scholarship. So the parents are freaking out, going, well, I don't have the money to pay for tuition, so I'm going to send them to this showcase, and then send them to that showcase, and they're going to play this game, and then, just don't get caught up in our system. It really scares me. That's why my kids are not doing that. They're just going to lift weights in the basement and eat raw eggs. I don't know if I answered your question, but maybe we can talk after and brainstorm.
Brad, sorry,
Yeah.
one thing, how you're saying about changing sports, but in a lot of countries they don't have that. Because I have my kids changing sports, but in a lot of countries they're doing the same sport, so they actually should adopt what it used to be like.
That's true. I just assumed.
Yeah, no, because we still, even though a lot of parents are going that pattern, you do have the possibility to do, the different sports if you choose, right?
True.
But in a lot of countries, they don't have the seasons that you see, like the soccer players, this season, and then you see the basketball and then baseball and rugby.
Well, go ahead.
What I'm seeing, a lot of parents go, as a coach, you have to try to explain to them the importance of having the kids trying other sports. But most of the parents in my country, they want the children to be in track and field. They don't want them to play no other sport. And then when they go to school, they don't want to play cricket, they don't want to play football, nothing. They want them to be because they have seen the success, they want them to continue in track and field. So then what we have realized that the kids that participated more, as you said, participated more different sports, they are better athletes.
Yes.
They are the same one on the football team that could make the football team anytime, and the same one that play cricket and basketball. So it shows you the overall development of that. As you was talking about the recuperation period, what I've seen this year, I don't know, maybe as I see the Olympics and medals in the Caribbean kind of confuse us. Most of the athletes now, even in that period, the parents want the students, even without the coach, to go to the gym. which is not recommended, because send them in the gym and they don't want to system in the gym. This who could bench press the strongest, everybody wants to have the big bicep. So the parents actually sending them because they want to give them maybe a head start when they could start back with the training in the general prep with September. So it's the whole confusion not only as the coaches but as the guardian and the children to educate them about the importance of realization and actually the importance of rest and recuperation. But you still have the mentality that you work hard and if you don't pain, no gain, those kind of, the kind of thing that sit on the judges, so we still have that concept that to be successful you have to go through another painful period. But this is not, most of them overwork and burn out before they reach the peak age of high performance.
Everybody familiar with the term long-term athlete development? Okay. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about, is giving people a chance to develop other skills that actually will in turn make them a better athlete in their sport. And, that's, the role of the coach is so important, it's amazing. Do not ever discount what you do, because you can get into sometimes you are the family, sometimes you're the principal, sometimes you're the best friend, but your counsel can do a lot and sometimes fundamentally change a culture. And that's a lot to put on your shoulders, but if you're in a situation where it's just everybody wants to run track and they don't want to play football, and they don't want to go to the gym and do it properly, that's where your vision and you can actually influence what goes on, at least in your little world. And this is one of those non-sporting moments, but there's a social philosopher, Mesereau, and it always kind of resonates with me, is that once you know something, it's your responsibility to the world or to your world to make a change. So anytime that I want to get selfish or I think it's too big for me to do something, I always think of Mesereau's law. Like, it's your job, once you have this knowledge, to do something about it. Sometimes it's like, oh, that's too big for me to do. Well, now it's your obligation to do that big thing, right? And so it's kind of a good case study to see if you can change a culture. I mean, that's why we're here. Sport changes lives.
This type of problem here, I don't know if I'm still help. Like, if you look at this, the level between the 10 year, because of the people we face. On the people we face, can you put up the laws of overloading capacity?
You can. So the preparatory phase can actually be broadened out. So like on the next slide, and this is still pretty basic, and you can get further into this too. So general prep is multifaceted. It's going to go, so preparatory is general prep, where you actually improve work capacity through a lot of volume, and then special prep where volume can still be manipulated, but things become a lot more closer to the sport itself. So if I need to improve rate of force development, I start doing that now. And so, yeah, special prep is going to still be higher volume, still improving work capacity, still working on getting that athlete ready to compete, but it's just more similar to what they need. Whereas general prep, remember, is multifaceted. You can play a game once in a while in general prep phase. As silly as this sounds, when the weather is nice in May, I take the American football out and my bobsledders, and part of their warm-up, they run routes. So like if you watch on TV, you've got wide receivers, tight ends, they go out for a slant. That's what we do. I'm always all-time quarterback. And so it's, we do things like that to allow them to have some fun, but also to get what I call hidden volume. They're having fun and they're doing something they've not done for a long time. And these are grown men and women, in their 30s, out running to catch a football. But I'm doing it to build work capacity because they think we're playing football and I'm actually making them build some aerobic base. They don't know it. Because if I put down, go run 10 by 100 meters, why is he making me do this? But if I put football into it, they're going to do it all day. Yeah, it's perfect. Just play with their head. Now, as you move through And again, this is just basic tenets that you're going to see in your book. Really, anything that you hear over the next 2 weeks is going to still embrace this. Now, once you move through preparation, now you go into competition. And even competition is broken into major competitions, minor competitions, peaking competitions. Like I said, sometimes you're competing just to identify where you're at as a team, where you're at as an individual. You're okay with the win and a loss. Sometimes you want a loss as a coach. Sometimes you want to win. And so, again, it depends on where you're at in the quad and in the annual plan, how you determine what this is. Anybody familiar? I always go off on tangents. I should have reminded you this will probably last till 1 o'clock in the morning. Anybody familiar with the Dream Team? 96 basketball, Jordan, Patrick Ewing, Larry Bird, Johnson. Okay, Barkley. It always is funny who, Clyde Drexler, like who is everybody's fighting for their guy. So I'm a Duke basketball fan. So if there's any, you're going to hear this first. The day that Duke University calls me, I'm leaving the USOC. So just make sure that Duke University, they are not allowed to call Lake Placid. So tell Mike Krzyzewski, do not call Brad. I'll work for free at Duke. It's just ridiculous. So Mike Krzyzewski's the basketball coach at Duke University. And he's a great mind just to read about leadership. If you ever want to read about leadership, he's a good one to look into. But if you've seen the Dream Team documentary, you hear where he and the head coach at the time, now it's escaping me, the head coach of the Pistons, Jeff, do you remember? Chuck Daly. Chuck Daly, the head coach of the Pistons. So you have the Dream Team practicing a closed gym against a group of college athletes, Bobby Hurley, Chris Webber from the Dream Team, etc. The college team, these kids beat the Dream Team. There is no way that happens in the real world. But Chuck Daly wanted that to happen. Why? Because number one, he didn't want to get embarrassed on the international stage. Number two, he wanted his team to play as a team. So he let those clowns get beat by a bunch of college kids. What happened after they figured that out the next day? The college kids got beat by 100 points. So I don't think they had the ball. I don't think it happened. So, but what I'm saying is, I'm just going back to this. Sometimes competitions can't be equally graded. Sometimes you want a loss. And going back to being a Duke fan, I think I know Krzyzewski pretty well as an armchair quarterback. Meaning I like to watch the TV and think I know what's going through his head. And there's times when I want them to win the game, and he's just sitting on the bench, and I'm like, would you sub him out? Would you change your defense? Like, what are you doing? And I know he wants them to lose because the vision is bigger than that one game. It's crazy, but good coaches know when to do that. You know, you've got to be comfortable with your system, and you've got to learn that there's teaching moments. And sometimes it comes through losing. So the transition period follows competition. And the way we define this is that it is general fitness maintenance through active recovery. So you don't need your athletes going out drinking, just living large, sleeping on the couch. You actually want them doing things that's going to release tension in the mind, but keep their body stable. Now obviously they're not going to maintain sport physical fitness. You can never be at 97 to 100% of your peak form year-round. That's just not possible as a clean athlete. Sorry. This is the time when you want them to get out of shape. Just not too out of shape. Now, periodization strategy, and I really try to do a good job of balancing this out because I know that you're going to hear about periodization and training theory like 2 or 3 times. So I'm going to give you what is different than the way I approached this last year. Last year I came in and talked about periodization ad nauseam. This year I'm going to talk about it briefly, and I'm actually going to give you a specific example of what we do here. I'm giving you the playbook, and Heather can attest. Like, I feel like I have built my competitor after what she told me today. Now I've got to like work extra hard because their athletes are running faster than my athletes. So maybe I shouldn't go over these last slides, but you know, like I said, my belief is that when you know something, it's not good just for you to know it. You know, and also I believe that it's when you take the recipe, it's not always going to be the same because we're different chefs. So just because it works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. But this is something that we are validating through a lot of research in USOC, specifically in Lake Placid. So one thing I'm going to talk about today is what most people call traditional periodization, and its birth came from Eastern European models, so coupled successive, Russian conjugate, however you want to call it. But we have taken it in the West and refined it through science, through testing. So if you look at some of the old literature, it was always like, this happened. How did it happen? What was the p-value? Was it statistically significant? Well, who was the control? So we have this Western way of doing things with the scientific method. And it's annoying, but guess what? It allows us to know if something's true or not true. So that is what this is built on. So conjugate periodization is block training. It's gone over in your book, periodization. I think Half talks about it as an advanced training module. Something that has linear, it has step loading, it has summated training, it has all the above. It's difficult, but it's not that hard. It's actually pretty self-explanatory when you just familiarize yourself with it. So block periodization is saying that you dedicate a block, which most of the time is a month. Most of the time, remember, it's 3 weeks up of intensity building, 1 week down. You dedicate that to one specific training factor. Maybe it's strength endurance. Maybe it's strength. Maybe it's speed. Maybe it's aerobic capacity. Maybe it's lactate threshold. Whatever the case may be, you dedicate this block to improving that one thing. Now, that does not mean that everything else is shut off. That just means that everything else, you dial it down a notch. Everything else is maintained. So you have your primary objective, secondary objective, tertiary, and your fourth objective. On the flip of block periodization would be something we call concurrent, daily undulating. That is where coaches believe that you can train every energetic system, every principle, every factor, every week, all day, every day, that the human is just a machine that is just non-stop, doesn't work. I guess I just let you know my true colors. Block periodization has been around a long time. People have tried to tear it down, tear it down, tear it down, and guess what happens? It keeps improving, long-lasting. It doesn't go anywhere. You know why? It works. That's why, I mean, I don't know why people just can't jump on the bandwagon, because it works. You know, but we like to, what I've heard, we in the West like to put it, I guess the statement was, put our tie on before we put our suit on. We're always wanting to outthink ourselves and get to the end before we actually go through the development stage.
Yeah, so will you start speed in the first block?
When I start speed in the first block,
Yeah.
I start speed on day one. And I'll go into that in just a minute, because this is supported in not only physiology, biomechanics, but also learning theory, motor learning. And Heather can, anybody that wants to spar on short to long, long to short, I am your man. I'm a Charlie Francis disciple. That's, I think, what's unique is that I was blessed to study, you know, Charlie Francis, the speed coach. I was blessed to be able to study under Charlie and Dr. Stone. So I had the best speed coach as my mentor. And on this hand, I had Dr. Mike Stone, who's probably the modern day Picasso of strength conditioning. So it's, you know, early enlightenment, you know, and I was just like, I'm going with it. You know, like I'm not arguing. I don't know how I got to be the only person that got to hang out with these guys. But nonetheless, here I am making up stories to you all. Block periodization is again, making a priority, whatever the case may be, maintaining other training factors. And then taking that block, and it's like a domino effect. So this block, you improve strength endurance, which we know physiologically will improve strength. So that block or that domino hits this domino. Those two impact maximum strength, absolute strength, explosive strength. They all work successively. But if you skip this one, or you try to train things along with this one, it interferes with the development and the maturation of the next block. So that's what block training is. It says, this is my goal now, that's my goal in 6 months. Taking the time to develop this will improve this. Long-term development. Even for an elite athlete, long-term development. I've kind of mentioned all this, obviously. Potentiation of future blocks. It allows a variability in training. So you can always do the same things, like you can still squat, but go from back squat to front squat. The variation of training, and there's some research that shows that removal of an exercise component for 4 weeks and then the reintroduction of allows for higher velocities in that movement when you reintroduce it. Pretty cool stuff. Again, science has shown this. So, like I said, you don't have to back squat every day. There's other things that you can do outside of back squat. Sprint, you've got to sprint. Along with the manipulation of volume load, remember the sudden jump from 3x5 to 5x5, that prevents the decay of fitness that we developed early on. So those overreaching strategies allow us to maintain all of those abilities that we've developed throughout the training year. So we never lose fitness. We never go out of shape. That overreaching allows us to do that, which is cool, because the naysayers of block periodization, that's why they always hang their hat on. They go, well, you need to do endurance training every week or you're going to lose it. And then you're just like, no, we're not. Because we do this higher block, this microcycle, and it's actually higher volume than we would if we just did this every day. Number 2 is the body doesn't lose fitness that fast. You know, it's, again, I guess with physiology, the coaches, you know, when you understand the physiology, you're more comfortable with it. And you know that it takes 72 hours to even see a slight decline in enzymatic activity. So enzymes are just these little creatures, these little chemicals in the body that live in a cell that help move things faster. They help move sugar faster from moments as far as the breakdown of sugar to ATP. It just helps catalyze. So enzymes fast forward events in the body that are naturally going to occur anyway. So the loss of enzymes is a term called involution. You're not going to have involution overnight. So again, block periodization allows you to feel comfortable knowing that you can maintain these qualities without people panicking. And that's kind of what concurrent training does. People are panicking. Like I said, this is evidence-based. So strength endurance, and look at that. There's your textbook as one of the references for this slide. But phase or block training is built on the science that improvements in metabolism, bioenergetics, or the use of energy in the body, along with the improvements in the cross-sectional area or the basic size of the muscle fiber and connective tissue and bone,